Hi, folks. I'm Denise Howell, and I'm here with my co-host, Dave Levine. Hi, Dave.
Hi, Denise. Great to see you.
Great to see you too. And you're joining us here at the Hearsay Culture Network for R&D with D&D. You've been introduced to the D and the D. I'd now like to introduce you to our wonderful guest today. I'm so excited to introduce you to a dear old friend of mine, Ernie Svenson. Hi, Ernie. It's great to see you.
Great to see you too, Denise, always.
I was telling these guys before we went live that part of the reason, a huge part of the reason that I love doing podcasts is to get together with old friends and find out what's going on with them and what's in their heads these days. Ernie and I have known each other since the very, very early days of blogging back in the late 1990s / early 2000s. Ernie started a blog called Ernie the Attorney, which he is affectionately known as throughout the internet and the world. And so in addition to being an early blogger, Ernie has obviously also been an attorney and now finds himself helping attorneys out primarily with the way they communicate with others. He has a business called Law Firm Autopilot. Tell us a little bit more about that, Ernie.
Sure. Yeah. So it's been called a couple of different things. I think I started with paperless chase, uh, and then changed to something else. But law firm autopilot, I think, reflects what I'm trying to help lawyers do, which is to create a practice that has less friction, that where they can get things done faster, easier, enjoy the practice more. And of course, technology plays a huge role in this because if you use technology well, you can get rid of a lot of the drudgery. But a lot of lawyers have trouble with that, especially older lawyers my age and thereabouts. And so that's what I help them do. I just help them figure out the strategies, the best practices, try to keep them away from the shiny objects, and hopefully help them enjoy their practices more.
Yeah, and a lot of the shiny objects that you help keep lawyers away from, I mean, I think it's a huge lesson, not just for the legal profession, but for anyone who wants to communicate effectively and realistically and in a way that garners trust.
Mhm.
Fortunately, Ernie is still blogging, and one of my favorite current posts on your blog or recent posts on your blog has to do with the South Park episode that involved gnomes selling underpants and had the whole notion that they wanted to steal underpants and then sell them, but really didn't have any purpose for that. It was step 2 that was missing. Steps
Yeah.
1 and 3 were there, and getting step 2 right seems to be a problem that many, not just businesses but individuals face. Could you frame that
Sure.
for us a little bit, Ernie, why you hit on that as such a great life lesson?
Well, I think a lot of what I try to tease out or figure out is why are people not getting things right based on how they think. I'm big on like thinking correctly. I was a philosophy major. To me, that matters. And what I saw, but myself as well, is like you had this thing like, oh, I want to do X, like, I want to, have a solo practice and I want it to thrive. Okay, great. And then I'm going to start by doing this. Well, what about that part in the middle, where all the messy stuff happens, right? And everybody kind of glosses over that. And that can't be glossed over because it matters. It's like you can't get to the golden rainbow, place without working through all the challenges. And I think a lot of marketing, a lot of, boosterism kind of ignores that because you want to have people be all enthusiastic and motivated, which, yeah, that's good. But you have to prepare for the fact that things aren't going to go the way you expect them to. So I'm kind of big on the messy middle.
Right.
And can I?
And one of the things that, sorry, go ahead,
Yeah,
Dave.
no, go ahead, Denise. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I mean, it's so there has to be a there, and that was one of the things that I've always admired about your writing and your work online is you have always been very transparent and been very much yourself online and told people, what your insights were and what your closely held beliefs were and what your talents were and your achievements in a not bombastic way, but just straightforward, this is what I
Mhm.
can do for you, which is just marvelous. What were you going to say, Dave?
Yeah, and these are the early days of the D&D show. And we'll work on not stepping on each other, but that was on me. So I was reminded in your response to Denise's question of Paul Sappho's famous quote. Don't mistake a clear view for a short distance, and the work that goes into things. And I'm curious how that business maxim fits into your broader view that you're trying to bring to the table.
Yeah, I mean I like that even better than the no underpants business model. Yeah, it's I don't know. I grew up with a dad who was a shrink. He was a psychoanalyst to top it all off, and I guess he instilled in me a lot of paying attention to how people think, how one thinks, what beliefs can empower you, and what beliefs can disable you or trip you up. And so I think it really matters how you communicate, to yourself as well as to other people. And yes, I love quotes like that because they're pithy and they make an important point. And I think a lot of times people will hear a quote like that and say, "Oh, that sounds great. It's inspirational." But it's like, but what's behind that quote? Like, yeah, I can see from this peak to that peak. Down there's a valley and a couple of hills and some, bear traps. So yeah, it's about having good vision, but recognizing that it's going to take some time to get there and there are going to be some challenges.
Right.
So speaking of challenges, I wanted to explore with you, and this is another thing that you posted on your blog that I found was just fascinating, that you had a really interesting early life experience where sort of it was sprung on you that you and your brother and your mom were going
Mhm,
to be moved to and be living in Panama,
mhm.
which might sound delightful to a lot of people. But how old were you at the time?
I was 12.
Wow.
You were 12.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, just those early formative teen years, and to be uprooted and put into a place where you did not speak the language and were an outsider. How do you think that impacted you over the course of your life?
Well, I think it's one of the most, if not the most important thing that happened to me in terms of helping me develop certain ways of thinking and approaching things. I actually did speak Spanish when I went there. My mother had spoken to me in Spanish when I was a kid, and I actually learned Spanish before English. And then when I was, sent off to grade school, I learned English, and then I forgot a lot of my Spanish, but I always understood it. So I had less trouble than my younger brother, who did not speak it or understand it at all. And when we went there, my mother had had enough with the U.S. Her second marriage had failed, and she told us we were going for a summer vacation. We had a great time for the summer, and then suddenly it was revealed that we were going to stay in the country, and she was going to put us in a school. And my brother and I, oh, okay, well, why don't you put us in the Canal Zone school where all the Americans are? Because, it just seemed like a great idea. She said, no, 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 we're not doing that. You're going to go to a Panamanian school. And not only was it a Panamanian school, it was a Jesuit run all boys school where you wore uniforms and there was a lot of discipline meted out, which I was not used to in school. And, the blog post that I wrote was about a stark moment was every Monday when they would herd everybody out into the courtyard to sing the Panamanian national anthem. I was standing there, like looking at this flag that I, don't know anything about. It's trying to sing words to a song that I don't know well. And the only reason I was singing the song is because if I didn't, I was scorned even more than I was ordinarily. So I'm sitting there looking at all this and I'm thinking, what a bunch of propaganda. Look at these people, complete sheep. They think this is a great country. And it's like, after a while, I was like, wait a second. If they think that, why do I think our country is so great? And then I started, it took a while for me to realize like your beliefs are inculcated through, through a crucible of other people around you doing that to you. And that was eye-opening. Not suddenly. It took a long time. I've had to reflect on it a lot. But as I have, it's helped me because I realized, well, people believe what they believe, not because they necessarily choose to, but because that's what they were raised with. And that's an
Yeah.
important insight for me.
Yeah, context and what it does to you. You had another really fascinating Twitter thread that I think Dave wants to explore more with you.
Yeah, and thanks, Denise. And it ties to that very last point about how we reach the conclusions that we reach. You wrote a while ago, Ernie, an interesting post about what seems like it's certainly a very timely question. It seems like a fundamental question. Why isn't political advertising spam? Right. I mean, particularly now, right? We're recording this show on July 29th, 2022. I'm getting texts from everyone, and I'm getting emails from everyone. And every email that I get tells me how it will be the end of times if I don't donate right now, with every clickbait, type phrase that you can come up with. And as you raise a pretty good question, which is, political solicitation looks a lot like spam, and yet, at least as a matter of technology law, it's not treated that way. Do you want to tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I've done everything I can to get rid of emails that I don't like. That's one of the things I try to help lawyers with. I use things like SaneBox, which puts everything into the Sane Later folder. And I don't generally go into the Sane Later folder because I've learned how to filter, but occasionally I do have to go in there to look to see what's going on in case something that I should have seen is in there. Well, whenever I go look in there, it's annoying because there's a lot of emails from political organizations, and I'm not going to make this political, but there is one particular person who used to be in office in one of the parties whose emails I get more of than others, and the headlines are clickbaity, and I do email marketing, so I pay attention to that too, and so I look at this and I'm thinking, well, if I want to do email marketing or other people want to do email marketing, you can't send out spam. They will shut you down immediately, right? And if you suddenly upload a whole bunch of new names to MailChimp or whomever, they're going to scrutinize you very closely. Well, apparently they don't if you're a political candidate. And so I never opted into any of these things, and I get them and I have to look at them and I have to filter them out. And the worst part of it to me is that they don't send from the same address. If they did, I could unsubscribe and then I wouldn't get any more emails from these people who never got my permission in the first place. But they send from a different email address every time. So it's a whack-a-mole game I can't win. And then I was shocked to find out that the reason they get to do this is First Amendment protection. Well, okay, what important political discourse is happening here? None. They're asking for money, right? And nonprofits apparently can't do this. Okay. So I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me, except it does, because everything with politics now has become completely Alice in Wonderland.
Mm-hmm. And then you also,
we were talking about,
oh, go ahead. Yeah, Denise, sorry. Yeah.
Thank you. We were talking about trust in communication. And this is certainly one where the trust falls down, and where when you're trying to play whack-a-mole to block something, clearly you don't trust what is going on there. And my host, actually, where I'm staying right now, told me an anecdote this morning about a certain political figure who is no longer in office, who was using fund solicitation emails, but they were masquerading as a really carefully thoughtful surveys, wanting to get the opinion of the constituents on various hot button issues. But the only way that, after you'd taken the time to complete the survey, that your survey would be submitted and supposedly read or used in some sort of meaningful way, was after you had agreed to donate. Which, I mean, and I'm not saying that any politician probably knows exactly what's going on in their fund solicitation emails. It all gets offshored and political strategized, I would assume. But if you don't have a handle on that, I don't think you have your constituents' trust.
Yeah, and the rules of the game are different. That's the other part. They talk about, it's rigged, it's fixed, whatever. Okay, you know what's rigged? If I try to send an email and include in the subject line the things that they are including, the ISPs would block them. Like there are things that just go, nope, you're not going to do that. You can't have an exclamation mark. You can't have, free money, any of that stuff. Apparently these folks just go right past that barrier, get to do this. And then the other thing, which I didn't mention in the Twitter rant, but this was in my mind, was this thing where Google is apparently going to now push it over into the primary inbox. Wait a second. I mean, not only is it not, they're not going to make it not spam and not go into your promotions inbox tab, are they going to push it over into the inbox? Seriously? I want somebody, I'll vote for whichever candidate addresses this sole issue, because at that point, they're at least doing something that I can measure, that's real, that matters to me every day in the scrum of my inbox.
Well, and yeah, go ahead, Denise. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I was just going to say,
I was just gonna say,
there's no incentive to do
if
it.
they can solve that, if they can solve that, they can solve other big problems, which is
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And why, but why would they want to solve it, Denise? I mean, that's the thing, which makes it so crazy
Yeah.
is that, clearly they have to know, and this is a bipartisan problem, by the way, let's be clear, right? I mean, it's a bipartisan problem. They have to know that the individuals that are, the elected officials, and I'm putting that in quotes for those of you that are listening only to audio, right, are not writing this stuff. And they have to know they look silly sending daily, and multiple times a day, sometimes emails saying, you better give us money now, or, we're going to lose everything and whatever else. Clearly, they're making enough money off of this in our money financed electoral system that they've done the math that it's worth the embarrassment, forget the shame. And of course, as you pointed out in you call them rants, but I think they're really insightful, Larry. There's a carve out for political communications and acts like the Can't Spam Act. So it's really a intractable problem, which brings us to one reaction to it, Denise, which is the next topic you wanted to bring up.
Yeah, definitely. And Ernie, I'm so glad to have you with us here today, because I think lots of us who were not philosophy majors and haven't studied a lot of philosophers throughout the course of our lives have heard of Stoicism and have sort of a vague idea what it is, but not a concrete idea what it is. And you did you retweeted someone, Ryan Holiday on Twitter, with 8 Stoic habits to do each day, which just seem like, the kinds of things that if you were doing these things every day, you might avoid the problem of having untrustworthy communications with people who matter to you. But can you back it up a moment before we go into what those guideposts are? Tell us a bit about Stoicism and why it's important to you.
So when I studied philosophy in college, I did not study Stoicism. I don't even think I knew that that was a thing you could take. I don't think there were any courses on it, but I was interested in using philosophy in a practical way. I mean, the first course I took was called Philosophy of Self. And, we read Jung, we read Freud, and we read Carlos Castaneda. And I remember thinking, wow, this is a cool major. I'm going to take some more classes in this major. And then it was a lot of, phenomenology. I mean, existentialism was cool, but there was no Stoicism classes. And when I got out, I realized, like, oh, wait, there's this whole body that's been around for thousands of years where the point is learn how to live a better life. And the central tenet, in my mind, of Stoicism is you can't control anything except possibly what you think, which, we've already talked about, having beliefs installed. So those aren't necessarily things you would automatically control. But if you reflect, if you pay attention, you can start to control more of what you think, which is pretty much Buddhism, right? It's the same kind of concept. And so these things overlap. And I like that. I like the idea that I could use the time I spend thinking about things and reflecting, not just, for idle purposes, but rather to get an outcome. And the most important outcome to most people is how can I be a little happier or a little less fragile as I move through life? So I think it's a hugely beneficial practice.
Yeah, I do too. And the 8 things, just so we don't keep you all in suspense as to what these great things that you might be able to do for yourself and others would be. Number 1 is journal. 2, go for a walk. 3, do some deep work. 4, do a kindness. 5, read. 6, get some strenuous exercise. 7, connect with friends and family. And 8, meditate on your mortality. Wonderful things to do every day. Do some deep work. When you hear this, Ernie, do you go to your psychologist father? And is that sort of what you think is invoked there?
Yeah, well, I mean, and also journaling every day. To me, those kind of go together. Like I have a morning practice where I've learned, and of course, I'm fortunate to live a life where I can do this. And instead of rushing to something, wake up, meditate, take some time, reflect, journal, get out of your head whatever thoughts come in, just so you can kind of see them. And there's a wonderful book called The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron that if you go look at Amazon and see how many reviews it has, it's ungodly the number of positive reviews, not just positive, but people say it changed their life. And like, to use one example, Brian Koppelman of Billion fame, the writer and creator of Billions, who is a lawyer who didn't practice law very long, but he's really creative. And he said that changed his life, that reading that book and doing what she recommended changed his life. And it's basically a support vehicle. The book is for the following proposition. Every morning, take time to write 3 pages longhand. Don't stop, don't think, don't censor for sure. And if you want to put commas here and there, that's fine, but just keep going. Push the pen across the page and see what happens if you do this for 12 weeks every day. And what happened to me when I did it the first time was and I had already been meditating, stuff bubbled up out of my unconscious. And I was like, whoa, that's kind of interesting. Where would I have thought of that unless I had done this? Gee, that unconscious place must hold a lot of stuff, and you can learn a lot about yourself and unravel a lot of things that are keeping you blocked and all kinds of other things if you simply do this. But the problem is it takes time, and most people feel like, oh, it's foolish, or they feel weird about it. And so they don't do it. And I understand that, but thank God I did for me, because it's been helpful. And I don't do it to that extent every day anymore, but I just sit there and think, well, whatever's coming out or feels like it wants to come out, I let it come out or do something with it. But you have to be there in that space ready to receive it. You can't be watching TV. You can't be talking on the phone. You can't be surfing the internet. You have to, you can sit outside and watch, the birds, but that's about it.
Yeah, I think just personally, I hope to do more of that in my own life, and I feel like our mental health crisis in general would be assisted if more people could be a bit more reflective and assessing of what's going on with them. They might have a better handle on managing it. Dave, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, one thing I was thinking through all of it is this discussion is that Stoicism, I think, to a lot of people has negative connotations, particularly in an era where everyone has to announce everything they're doing. And if it's, if there isn't a picture of it, it didn't happen. So I guess my follow-up question for you, Ernie, is how do you frame Stoicism in light of the inordinate pressure in 2022 to be more or less the opposite of a Stoic? The other point also is we're in theory coming out of a time of immense isolation because of COVID. Stoicism doesn't necessarily, is not equal to isolation, but it is part of it. Is there an argument for suggesting that we need, to some degree, less Stoicism in light of the forced isolation that has occurred over the last couple of years? Or am I just coming up with false dichotomies? So it's a two-parter.
Yeah, I think there is some false dichotomy. I would characterize it more as like an association that people might have about Stoicism, which frankly I had as well. Like when I first started hearing about it, I was like, oh, this is a bunch of tight-ass, rigid people who want to have discipline and, sit there. Same thing like with Zen Buddhism, sit there, I'm going to slap you on the head if you move. Like that kind of thing to me felt like, I don't really like that so much. I want to roam free and do things, but it's not that. I mean, it's more comes from the idea that if you can discipline certain things that are happening in your head, your mind, become aware of them is where you start. You don't say, I don't think it's productive, or for most people, it's not the best way to start to say, I'm going to be really rigid and sit here and time myself and not budge. That kind of meditation can work for some people, but I think for most people, it doesn't. I think what works well is if you can just be alone with your thoughts, which is really the challenge for most people when they start, and just observe them and realize that these things streaming through your head, you are not sitting there with the button saying, okay, give me some more thoughts about this. Like they're coming from where and why are they running through your head? And why are these particular ones running through your head now? If you can just observe them, a lot will start to fall into place and change. And that is Stoicism. I mean, Stoicism is just first become aware of what's going on, the deep stuff, not the superficial stuff. So that's deep, and it's important and vital to you.
Mhm.
And if you can observe it, then the other things that are going to happen that are important will start to happen naturally. Nobody needs to tell you what to do next. You'll know what to do next.
Ernie, you pointed out though that you're fortunate to have the time to do that, and I think probably, to be fair, Denise and I are equally fortunate to have the time to do that. So I don't know if I have an answer to the question I'm going to ask you, but why not? It's a podcast, and we can ask you questions we don't have answers to. That's kind of the point.
Yeah.
What would you recommend to our listeners who say, that sounds great, Ernie, Denise, and Dave, to get up and meditate and journal, but I have a family and kids and jobs and everything else I need to do? How do you achieve, is my question for you, this ability to even engage in Stoicism if you're not fortunate enough to have the opportunity because of your circumstances?
Well, everything that's important and big started somewhere, and where it starts is somewhere small. And I can tell you how it started for me, which was meditation, and I can tell you how when it finally clicked, because I would try meditation here and there. I'd read a book, I had a misconception, and then I watched this movie, which I highly recommend, called The Dama Brothers, and it was about this experiment where they went into this prison in Alabama, where there were these people who were, lifelong criminals who'd done horrible things, and they gave them the opportunity to participate in this 10-day, you don't speak, you just do Vipassana meditation, and they guided them, and they made this wonderful movie. And these people, you could see they changed. Something happened. A light bulb went off. They took responsibility. You could see they had changed. And the prison warden who let this all happen didn't think anything significant was going to happen, and he was shocked. And then, of course, the word got out to people in the area that something weird was going on, and they said, "Oh, this is terrible," and they shut it down. So, it didn't end in a happy story there. But these people probably are still practicing, the ones who want to, and they had to get going. So when I saw that, I thought, oh, this is great. I'm going to go to a 10-day can't speak meditation, started looking them up. They're all over the world. Some of them are in beautiful places, but you do have to take 10 days out of your life. And I thought, if I could even manage to pull that off, then when I returned, what would happen? Well, what would happen is I'd probably go back to doing what I did, because I don't have a practice. So then I saw this Headspace meditation app, which was free for 10 days. And you could do 10 minutes for 10 days. And I thought, you know what? If I can't do 10 days of 10-minute meditation, I will abandon I can just dispense with dreaming about doing any of this, 10-day stuff. Yeah. And I was able to do it. I thought, oh, wow, look at that. I can do this. And then I kept going, and it was kind of sporadic. And, but then as I started to experience the benefits, and because that's what's going to convince you to do it or to keep doing it. When you start to experience the benefits, you realize, wow, this is a good thing. And the first benefit that I think most people will start to experience is you're less reactive. And then you start to realize how reactive we all are to all kinds of things, conditioning, beliefs, things that we get worked up over, things that happen suddenly in a flash. And if you can start to put 1 nanosecond between you and the reaction, and then start to increase that buffer time between you and the reaction, or reflect on things when you didn't, have the buffer and you reacted, and you start to go, wait a second, man, a lot of stuff I do is not under my control. Okay, so then you realize, well, do I want to live a life where more things are under my control that affect me? Or do I just want to be a bobbing bottle in the ocean? And I think when you have that realization, you can move forward. But it's people have to figure it out their own way. I don't have, the one path to anything. And I certainly haven't reached the mountaintop, so I don't know. Got to figure it out
I
for
think
yourself.
that's a really, really good segue into our next topic that Dave wants to explore a bit deeper with you. That goes back to this overarching theme of trust and trust in online communications.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of being as internal and reflective as some of what we've been discussing, goes to something that's ripped right from the current headlines, and whether or not Elon Musk is going to buy Twitter. And the reason that Elon says he's not buying Twitter, which is that Twitter, and lots of the online world for that matter, is riddled with bots. Dave?
Thanks, Denise. Yeah. And speaking of stoicism, good luck being a Stoic and engaging in Twitter at all. Particularly if, as Yahoo Finance, asked, what if Elon Musk is right? Right. And for those that truly have been Stoics in the sense that perhaps all of us aspire, you would be aware that Elon Musk made what appears to have been a somewhat impromptu, massive offer to acquire Twitter, only to go through a convulsive process that will enrich many of us attorneys and others by pulling the offer. I teach contracts, Ernie, over at Elon, and I'm not going to ask you the contract question. I'm going to save that for my students, but I am going to ask you the bot question because it's a really important one. It's no secret that bots are on Twitter. Everyone who's paid attention has known that. Those issues, of course, took prominence during the 2016 election, and on and on and on. But now we're in this odd space, it seems, where we've got the wealthiest man in the world making a questionable, let's put it that way, right, offer to acquire Twitter, and using, and this is the question, right, factually correctly, is saying no. What this property is a lot of automated robots creating noise that are not the eyeballs that we want for advertising, and therefore undermine the value. What's your take, though, on that question as to whether Elon Musk is right, not as a matter of contract law, I want to put that aside, but as a matter of the technology itself?
Well, I think that he probably is right because, technology now has been riddled with this whole thing of AI, right? Like, how can we get the bots, AI, and use the algorithms to fine tune what people want to hear more of or what we want them to hear more of? And of course, if they don't have restraint or control over things and can't put a buffer and react, you can send them down a slippery slope more easily, right? So people who want to control the minds of people, if people are more reactive, that's good for them. Right. The algorithm does the rest of the work. And that algorithm is in Facebook, it's in Twitter, and it's in a lot of places. And, I think about Alan Turing, in the Turing test, like, when are we going to have this machine that we can't tell is a machine because of how it responds to things? Well, in a weird kind of way, this is what we're talking about, because humans aren't aware that what they're dealing with is not human driven, but rather machine driven. And it's machine driven in response to how they say things. And so I feel like, where Stoicism can help, if you want to plug Stoicism in, is if you can control your own thinking more and understand and see more that people who run the media companies, they don't have your interest at heart. This is why the email, are flooded. Like, they are there to help themselves. So if you can't defend yourself against that at the first line of defense, which is your mind and observing what's really going on, you're going to have problems because they got better algorithms than you, and they got more resources and money to throw at that problem. And you're just one, person being besieged by lots of bots. So that, to me, is the most important thing to understand. And if you do understand that, and the more you understand it, the more you think, well, Twitter's fine. I can go on Twitter if I want to. I'm just not going on Twitter to discover amazing new insights. Unless my insight is watching human beings, act like ants and follow a pheromone trail,
Right. Denise, you want to add anything on this front?
Yeah, no, I wish, oops, sorry. Some of my housemates are chiming in, being very reactive, by the way. Yeah, I think what I'll do here is, unless the two of you want to talk more about bots, but use this as the excuse to say, I wish I'd had this conversation a week ago and had been in a more reflective and less reactive state of mind when I looked up into the night sky in the Western United States and saw something coming across that my son and I both concluded meant the end times were here. It went on and on and on. It was clearly not a natural phenomenon. It was like nothing we'd ever seen in the sky before. We went very reactively running to the proprietors of the place we were staying and told them there is something in the sky that shouldn't be there in a much more panicked way than I just said.
Mm-hmm.
And they looked at us calmly and said, that's our internet provider, Starlink.
Interesting.
Speaking of Elon and his doings, he's not only battling bots on Twitter, so he says, but he is putting a series of satellites in the sky that are staggering to see when you see them, and doing great things, I guess, for providing rural, inaccessible areas with high-speed internet. And obviously there's great benefit to be had from that. But I also, first of all, I'm concerned that people are not very well informed what this is, and it's very scary the first time you see it.
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, that if Elon's gotten permission to do this, how many other private firms are going to be putting enormous things in the sky for possibly wonderfully beneficial reasons? Ernie, have you seen this yet?
I haven't, but I mean, the first thought that occurs to me is if lots of things besides what's already there get put up there in space, eventually you can start running into each other, and that's
Yeah.
going to be a whole different 4th of July celebration.
Yeah, quite definitely. Dave, what are your thoughts on it?
It goes first of all, it reminded me of Project Loon, which Google had done a while ago.
Yes.
And as a nerd aviation enthusiast, I have been known to late at night go on Flight Radar 24 and just for my own amusement say, oh, where are planes flying right now? Which has been enlightening at different times. I mean, most recently, frankly, during the tragic exit from Afghanistan and watching the C-130s move in and out. But now we've got something totally different, right? Which is this, and this is my question for you and comment, Ernie, this kind of unilateral decision of sorts on the part of Elon, right, and his company to deploy this technology, under the kind of, the late Steve Jobs kind of concept of, don't worry, you'll like it. I'm just going to do it. And then, build and they will come. And Denise's reaction to me is not only, understandable, I think it's quite common, particularly for folks who view these devices flying over you as nuisances, right? As potentially having privacy implications, and a variety of other things. So I'm curious what if you have an opinion, Ernie, on the question of whether a private entity or an individual, in the case of Elon, should have the power to more or less decide to deploy a technology whose impact, while positive in the sense that there's internet access, assuming we could agree that that's a positive thing, right, has other externalities and negative impacts that people may not have a say in deciding.
Yeah, I mean, do I have an opinion? I mean, I guess I can summon opinions quite quickly.
Yeah.
I don't, I guess the thing that concerns me is more, I zoom out more. Like I'm, of course it's instinctively, one tends to say, I would tend to say, oh, we shouldn't have individuals, putting up important things like that. That's that's a rational instinct. Then if you think about it, you go, well, maybe if the government, took forever to put up something and do something useful, which is what seems to be going on now, then anything that happens, however it happens, if it's good, that supersedes. But then that really is an ends justifies the means argument, right? Which is pretty much the central tenet of both parties now, right? So I feel like we should, as humans, as a human race, we should get beyond the end justifies the means thing and figure out how to collaborate in the right way about things. And I think that for that to happen in a good way, then we have to train people, empower them, cajole them, do whatever, so that we all think below the superficial, obvious, trivial, insane, ridiculous stuff. And so, whatever my first reaction is, I go, well, that's my first reaction. I'm gonna have to sit on this to see if there's something deeper. That's what I That's my opinion or my
Yeah, and I'll
response.
tell you, you suggested a book there, and I'm going to come back to it. I'll hand it over to Denise for comments and for our speed round. Shannon Valor, I had on the KZSU show years ago with a book she wrote, which I think you would enjoy, Ernie, in particular, but certainly all of our listeners would, called Technology and the Virtues. And she wrote from a philosophical standpoint, what I think is a brilliant book about how to inculcate the classic virtues into technological development, which I think is another way of saying, what you're pointing out. We're gonna close our discussion with any other comments Denise has on this situation, and then get into the
Yes,
speech.
just to follow up on Starlink, I was going to tell people that if they're interested in having a less frightening encounter with this series of Starlink satellites, but seeing what they look like for themselves, there is a site called findstarlink.com that is, its goal is to track them and show you globally where you might have a good chance of seeing this incredible train of satellites roll by in the sky. But when you go to findstarlink.com right now, it says, hi there, based on user reports, Starlink trains are not very visible right now. This is because Starlink's company has reduced their brightness to avoid disturbing astronomers. And they link out to a BBC News article about the headline of which says, Musk says SpaceX is fixing brightness from satellites. So maybe perhaps they can dial them down a bit and they won't be quite so disturbing. I think, the various other things that we've spoken about are still issues, and they don't go away, but it's nice to see that if there is some reaction to what's going on, that perhaps some adjustments can be made.
Yeah, that's some good news.
Yeah. All right, so we would like to ask you a series of quick questions, Ernie. We'll go back and forth. Just tell us off the top of your head your best impressions, first impressions, and we'll move through them. And your first question is, what's something that's changed for the better since you were young?
Access to information. I loved reading books. I loved going to libraries. I liked finding information and learning about things. And oh my God, now I don't have to go to the library. I can do it from my phone.
Which ties to the second question, Ernie. What's your favorite long read?
Long read. Well, I'll give as a long read a book called The Path Between the Seas, because it's about how the Panama Canal was built by David. It's a book by David McCullough. It's a really good book. And there's a lot of things in that book that you wouldn't expect to learn about, like Sullivan and Cromwell was involved, and a lot of the information they got, was from the law firm, law archives of Sullivan and Cromwell. I mean, it's just a whole bunch of different things. And in today's world, I don't know that we have the political will to take on that kind of an engineering project. Maybe we can go to space and suffer with, deal with people dying and things blowing up, but we're not going to carve out, we're not going to carve a thing between two continents anymore. That game's over. And I find it interesting that we live through that era and we have better technology now and less inclination to do that.
What's something that surprises you?
Human nature every day, how persistent it is and how predictable it is if you just look at it the right way.
The best view in New Orleans?
If you get close to the Mississippi River, they just opened a Four Seasons in a building that had been there forever, and it's right on the Mississippi River, and you can look right down on it, and it's free. Anybody can go up there. That's a pretty good view.
What's the key to a long, happy life?
42.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And the last speed round question: what technology do you trust the most?
People's ability to think. It's not, it doesn't sound like a technology, but when we think of technology today, we think of how intelligent it has become and can be, but at the root of all that intelligence is the human imagination, human creativity, working problems out. That's where it all started, and that, to me, that's the best technology.
And that's an optimistic way to close a discussion on trust, I think, more than anything else.
Yeah.
I love it. Thank you so much, Ernie, for joining us here on R&D with D&D on the Hearsay Culture Network. It's been such a pleasure.
Same here. I really enjoyed it.
I'm Denise Howell. I'm here with my co-host.
Dave Levine. Thank you, Denise.
And we're so thrilled that you joined us today. We hope you come back to the network time and time again. Thanks so much.